This is the Fifth Estate Winning Headlines, your media police post. In this segment, we summarize some of the headlines that you might have missed this morning. But we also take a look at the political pieces that we call cartoons in this country. Today is the 24th of August, 2020, and I am 2J.
I'm Toom.
And I am DM. Let's take a look at today's headlines. On the Daily Nation, Uhuru's firm grip on power in COVID season. In the Standard, war erupts over COVID funds probe. And in the Star, Ruto Raila at war over Kemsa probe. A lot of war going on in the headlines today, but let's begin with the Daily Nation. That's talking about Uhuru's firm grip on power in the COVID season. So the Nation is telling us that the onset of the pandemic was bad news for the president for this reason. It stopped several of his legacy projects. And according to them, it loosened his political grip, on the country. However, 160 days down the line, all this has turned around. There's a silver lining because he has regained control on politics and development programs around the country. So one of the things that they're pointing out is that he has made the administrative state stronger, and they're referring to the cabinet committee that he instituted, headed by the CS Matiang'i. And of course, they're also making to the political changes that happened in Parliament, and also referring to the perpetually imminent cabinet reshuffle that is always in the horizon.
Around the corner.
Yes. So basically, they're saying that the president has taken advantage of the COVID-19 to get things in order, to regain control.
I just want to ask whether or not what the Daily Nation is saying is true in relation to what happened 160 days ago, that the president, his projects lost their tracks, he loosened his grip on politics. I think the most important thing is that the president showed up for the moment, right? And I think that we all know this, being president is the most thankless job. So I think that as much as the president has shown up for the moment, he picked the right people for the job. We're seeing that the flattening of the curve is beginning to take place. Of course, Kenyans are going to be thankless and say, but 160 days ago, what were you doing? I think he proved to us that he's ready for this job. He was ready to take it on, and he succeeded.
My thoughts on this story, though, are that there should actually be a mechanism for all and future presidents to tighten grip on power after the elections. For this reason, we have, since 2017, there has been a fixation, a preoccupation, an obsession with 2020. I mean, if somebody did a survey now to see how many times leaders in this country have mentioned the word 2022, it would surpass everything else. It would surprise progress, development, anything constructive. And of course, the mania has been led by the deputy president. And I was reading this story and wondering if the tables were turned, and it was actually the deputy president trying to complete his term, and his constitutional assistant is fixated on 2022. So I suppose the pandemic has presented the president
an opportunity to clear off all these distractions. Very good.
We have a three-part criteria that we use to analyze the headlines for you. We ask, is it topical or speculative? Is it repetitive or groundbreaking? And finally, is it thoughtful or just plain lazy? I think we can park this one and go on to the Standard and the stories in the Standard and the Star, talking about the same thing.
Absolutely. Let's amalgamate them.
What's the Standard headline?
Standard is war erupts over COVID funds probe.
And the Star headline is Ruto Raila at war over Kemsa probe. So this Kemsa story really has taken on a life of its own. And I think we know who the owner of it is, but let's just outline the details of these two stories. So what they're telling us is that both the deputy president and opposition, or former opposition, Raila Odinga, have clashed over the alleged misuse of the funds that Kemsa was to use for COVID procurement. And so I think they particularly draw our attention to a tweet from the DP over the weekend that said, the pretentious former opposition, now turned lords of corruption, attempted defense of the COVID-19 grand larceny is not shocking. It confirms the worst of Kenyans' fears, that their side of the handshake was never interested in the people's good, but the opportunity to loot. What a shame. It really sounds like somebody's feeling a bit left out.
That's the point. That's the point. But let me also read what Edwin Sifuna replied to him. He said, we asked for an audit. In which language is that a defense of theft? It is the hope of the actual thieves to disappear in the fog of the manufactured outrage. The worst of Kenyans' fear is you being in charge, now that is DP. For we will lack words to describe the plunder that will ensue.
The plunder that will ensue once he becomes president.
Once he becomes president. But you see, it's a fantastic thing that you say this. See, because who benefits from Kemsa or the Ministry of Health being being blasted outside there. And you ask yourself the question Prof likes to ask, who benefits from this? And it is very simple. It is William Ruto, if you're to do a hypothetical scan on this. But you see, I always sit back and I ask, what did Kemsa do wrong? You see, if it was up to you, 2J, and you're telling me something earlier, if a pandemic hit this country and you are in charge of Kemsa, what would you have done?
I think what I would have done is what many countries around the world did, is you address what procurement in the time of COVID really looks like. And I think if we just did a basic scan for some, territories around the world, we'll see that most countries decided that the most apt thing to do was to have the speediness or the quickness in which you procure these things that you need. And I think if we look at, for example, the UK, the UK told their departments, the NHS, which is their national health system, local councils and other agencies, that they needed to act fast because of the public health risks. And they could lawfully sign deals with private firms without competing or advertising the requirement. The EU said the exact same thing. Public buyers may negotiate directly with potential contractors, and there are no publication requirements, no time limits, no minimum number of candidates to be consulted, no other procedural requirements. And they all said this, was called the deactivation of procurement rules. Why? Because procurement in the time of COVID is stressful. And I think that we need to recognize that Kenya is not the only country going through these kinds of things. We have these issues of supply and demand. If you look at early February, for example, in Kenya, we had headlines, Chinese middlemen deplete Africa face mask supply. They came and they said China could only produce 20 million masks a day, when in reality they needed far more. So what do they do as the big bad, people out there? They came and they bought our masks. So what does it do to the price of masks in Kenya? They shoot up. This is basic supply and demand, guys. Come on.
Let me tell you guys a story. President says that COVID, March 15th, COVID has entered Kenya. Now, very enterprising fellow brings a ship full of about 1 million masks to the port of Mombasa. The guy goes and tells Kemsa, I have 1 million masks for you.
And Kemsa is delighted.
And Kemsa is delighted. How much? So they agree at 90 shillings per mask. Now, a fellow also who works situated somewhere around Gigiri for one of the biggest humanitarian organizations in the world, hears that there's 1 million masks at the port of Mombasa, and he says, I will buy them at 150 million shillings. Do you expect that guy who was being told to sell at 90 shillings would listen to 90?
Business is
not Kemsa was back to the drawing board to square one source.
So this guy sells to that humanitarian organization, and Kemsa is forced to go back to the drawing board. Now they start looking, we need masks because now there's pressure. Now everybody starts looking for masks. Now, point is this. You are at a point of a pandemic. You don't have time to do your normal procurement things as normal. You have to start looking, and the person who actually came up with this says, now I have masks, but because of air travel restrictions, I'll go to China, zoom them out, zigzag across 10 countries, but you have your mask within a certain
Because of course, who's going to bear the cost of all that extended travel that we normally did not have?
Absolutely. Point is this, the people who supplied Kemsa should actually not be castigated. They should be given medals because they saved this country at its point of need.
Kenyans need to stop getting their news from Twitter and half-wit bloggers and actually
and
engage.
That should be toilet paper.
I love that. Such a comprehensive explanation. So, who do we give the winning headline to? I want to propose the Daily Nation.
Same here.
And not the war.
Absolutely.
And on to the political pieces that we call cartoons in this country. Just like the headlines, we have a 3-part criteria that we use to analyze them for you. We ask, is it humorous or dry? Is it satirical or pessimistic? And finally, is the cartoon effective or just plain lazy? What do we have in the Daily Nation?
You have Iga, and he has drawn a drawing of Kenya in its sickbed. Kenya's economy in its sickbed. And the guy is on drip. But there is a vulture up there called Scandals that is feeding on the drip. And the economy is wondering, I thought this was for me.
The life out of my...
Look, this is the kind of nonsense the media has made people think. I mean, COVID, the nation has been telling people COVID is worth 43 billion shillings. COVID is actually...
the COVID...
COVID money is about 7.6 billion shillings. I mean, when you do the comparisons here, it just tells you this doesn't make sense. Someone just wants a story to throw.
Yeah, these guys are in the business of peddling heartbreak, and the worst thing about it is that it's just politically motivated. I think we tossed that cartoon immediately.
Agreed.
In the Standard, Gado has Raila and Ruto in conversation. And the first panel is Raila telling Ruto, listen, why don't you just drop all the shenanigans and become my running mate in 2022? And in the second panel, it is Ruto saying, look at it this way. Why don't you drop all the theatrics and become my running mate in 2022? This is exactly what I was talking about, guys. The preoccupation, obsession, and fixation. But this cartoon is hilarious. Nobody wants to give.
Yes.
What's happening in the Star?
You have a caricature of a cow. Caricature does.
A caricature.
Caricature.
Look at you.
Yeah, that's Kalonzo Musyoka. With and behind the cow is a cartoon of Deputy President William Ruto with former Senator of Machakos, Johnston Muthama. And I don't know what they're measuring. Is it the size of the bell that they should place on?
Yeah, they're just getting ready to bell him again.
Yes, but the caption there is, I will not be cowed this time. And I think this is with regard to the weekend fight between Kalonzo and Muthama. Kalonzo saying the way is Uhuru, and Muthama saying the way is Ruto.
So they want to Rutify.
They want to Rutify him, but Kalonzo is saying absolutely not.
I will not be cowed
this time.
Well, he's already a cow, according to the cartoon.
Yeah.
So this cartoon was quite funny, but I quite liked Gado's cartoon today.
Yeah, I like them.
The two contenders
I think
bantering.
For Monday, I have to really give it to them. This is a strong start to the week.
A strong start. Let's award both of them. Why not?
That's what I was going to suggest.
So the Standard and the Star give us our winning cartoons. So before we get to our final thought, I'd like to remind our viewers to please subscribe to our YouTube channel. So what is our final thought?
Now, our final thought is inspired by a book entitled Good Strategy, Bad Strategy, The Difference and Why It Matters by Richard P. Rumelt.
Yeah, so this week we're going to delve a little bit into strategy. I think we've done it before, but there's so many different iterations and ways that we can understand what strategy actually means and how to apply it. So the question is, what is a good strategy and what goes into it? What makes a strategy good? What makes a strategy bad? And how is a strategy different from your visions, from your goals? So in this book, UCLA professor Richard Rumlet takes a very vague concept and makes it concrete. He explains what goes into developing a strategy, what makes a strategy good, what makes a strategy bad, and what makes a good strategy even clearer. So strategy is designing a way to deal with a challenge. I think that's a very concrete and simple definition. A good strategy, therefore, must identify what challenge there is to overcome and design a way to overcome it. So to do that, the core of a good strategy, he says, has three elements, which I think DM will cover. But they are a diagnosis, a guiding policy, and a coherent action. So very in short, this book makes the point that most strategies fail to acknowledge those key obstacles or problems that must be overcome. So the first part of this book is about the common misconceptions about strategy and explaining why we have so many bad strategies around us. Then secondly, the book outlines what is needed to create a good strategy, explaining what he calls the kernel of a good strategy is. So what is a bad strategy? And the book starts by listing some of the hallmarks of a bad strategy. And therefore, the first one is fluff. So he says that sometimes you just write a lot of gibberish. You use obtuse or inflated words to create the illusion of high-level thinking. And I think a lot of people are guilty of those kinds of things. The second is a failure to face the challenge head-on. So a strategy that does not define its challenge to overcome makes it impossible to evaluate and impossible to improve. If you don't know what you're doing, you don't really know where to go. The third is mistaking goals for strategy. And this is a big one that Professor Mutahi always talks about. A goal is not a strategy. So many bad strategies are just statements of desire rather than plans for overcoming your problem. I want to become thin. And that's just a desire. I want to become thin, but I'm not saying how I'm going to do it. Or Tuam, is that your strategy? Anyway.
Focus.
The fourth one is a bad strategic objective. That is when you fail to address the critical issues that are imperative for what you need to do. So your objective just isn't the actual right one. And so he then asks, why are bad strategies so common? And he says there are three things. when leaders are unwilling or unable to make choices, you end up having this paralysis because you choose to avoid rather than dealing with the difficulty of choice. And so the third one he says is when you have this one-size-fits-all mentality. So you substitute the hard work of actually analyzing what your problem is and having coordinated action with just making tables that kind of like say, let's just identify all the big issues. And the third one, which is a very new and interesting one, is he says this thing of new thought, the belief that all you need to succeed is just having a mental positive attitude that's saying, I am the best, I can do it, I will get the job done. And he says those are the keys to a bad strategy and what create paralysis in our leaders. So I think this is a fantastic book, a very good read with so many interesting stories for, to help you apply the rules.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So let's get into what he calls the core of a good strategy. The first one is diagnosis. Naturally, you go to a doctor, that's the first thing she will do or he will do. So this is a theory describing the nature of the challenge. But I'd also like to add, not just a challenge, even an intention or the nature of the intention, what it is that you want to do. So it's about identifying the root causes at play. For example, if in an organization, the challenge is that there's high volume of work in progress. And this is what is preventing the completion of tasks. So there's always things that you're doing. Everybody is busy, but you never ever realize any outputs. So you put a strategy in place for that because you have made a very clear and distinct recognition of what it is, what the problem is. Thereafter, the second part is creating a guiding policy. And this is a series of general policies which will be applied to grapple with the challenge or deal with the intention. And what is interesting is that a guiding policy must involve a trade-off, according to the author. If you create a guiding policy and you find that there is no trade-off, then you should be suspicious of it. And a trade-off, a trade-off is what is it that you are going to lose if you prioritize this guiding policy. If you say that this is what is going to be the focus, there must be some things. In the example of a workplace, once again, for instance, if there is high work volume and you know that your guiding policy therefore is not to say we'll just work more. For instance, it is either prioritizing the high priority teams and staffing them more there, or working people harder but recognizing that your trade-off is going to be what? Attrition. People are going to leave, so how are you going to respond to that? And then finally, creating coherent actions, which is a set of specific actions directed by guiding policies to address the challenge identified in the diagnosis. And this is important because it clarifies that a strategy is only good or meaningful if it leads to an aligned action.
Absolutely.
As a good strategy that has not been executed is just that, words.
DM, I love what you've ended. And you know what I'm going to say? I think the president has been reading this book. President Kenyatta has been reading this book. And you know what part of this book that he likes the most? What is the core of a good strategy? Let me explain. Now, let's assume President Kenyatta plans to have a referendum by December 2020. Right? What does he do?
That's the diagnosis.
Yes. Well, no. First, before the diagnosis, what does he do?
That's his objective. Huh?
So he'll do two things. First, he'll say, I can do it in two ways, either through popular initiative or through parliamentary initiative. Which one is easier? Parliamentary initiative. And then he goes and says, let's do an audit of the architecture around Parliament. And he says, will it be possible for me to pass through Parliament? And he says no. So he diagnoses why. And then he sees you have majority leaders, one in National Assembly and one in the Senate. That would be problematic. Now that he comes up, now he goes to the next stage, which is the guiding policy. And the guiding policy is to do a purge on these two fellows. So he says, Duale out, Murkomen out. Right? Inward, he puts, is it Kemunya and Kanata, and he says, these fellows will help me pass whatever I want because I have already identified Parliament as a chamber that will pass this referendum. But now, he has to now line up the coherent actions. Coherent action, number one, is a purge, which has happened. Number two, it does a referendum will not happen without adopting a paper. That piece of paper is BBI, for example. BBI has to pass and to be adopted in both houses. And then current action number 3 is to establish a majority in both houses that can ensure the referendum is achieved. Now, if you do action 1, purge, action 2, adopt, action 3, majority, it will all equals
good
referendum,
strategy.
Good strategy.
Now Duala is going to look for this book, buy it and burn it.
And it is a book more men should read.
And other people who have been victims of that strategy.
Absolutely.
I'd like to end with one of our favorite quotes here on the Fifth Estate on strategy, and it's from Sun Tzu. He says, strategy without tactics is the slowest route to victory. Tactics without strategy is the noise before defeat.
Wow.
Ooh. Thank you for joining us
I hope
tonight.
Karen was listening.
Thank you for joining us. Please remember once again to subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can also find us on your TV screens. We are on Pantry, Star Times and GoTV. Have a good evening and see you tomorrow.